Good afternoon, everyone. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the candidates reporting earnings both after today's close as well as before tomorrow's open. Now, a lot of these results have already come out, so you can use some of this information and tweak it just a little bit. But I want to walk you through the process of using the Smarter Earnings Indicator to try and take a look to trade the actual day of earnings. Now, here on the left-hand side in this watch list, I have a list of all of those earning stocks. This is based off of the list provided by Earnings Whisper. You can also scan for this in Thinkorswim. And then I've narrowed it down based off of any stocks that have at least a $20 stock price and at least 500,000 in volume. So stocks that I think you would normally care to trade. Now, we have two different custom quotes here. The first one is the market pulse. Both of these are on the daily time frame. So this is the market pulse, and then this is whether or not we have an edge signal. Now, I'm going to be giving a little bit more weightage to anything that does have an edge signal today as a reason to try and participate in a bullish move. And on the right-hand side here, you'll notice I have a couple different indicators. So we have just our basic moving averages. The white line is the 200 simple. The yellow is the 50 simple. But most importantly, we have our Smarter Earnings Indicator right here. This is a free indicator for those of you that would like to follow along. I'll make sure it's linked in the description box. But what we want to do is go through a 2-year, 1-day chart and take a look to see wherever we have either something that's substantial in terms of our greater than expected move X percentage of the time. So that's the first check we'll be looking at. The second check is around the gap fills. I normally like to see this at least above 4 or more than 50% of the total number of earnings that we see. That's where I'll call for our attention. And then the third check is around the gap and goes. Now, as a quick reminder, a gap fill is essentially where, say, price action is here, we gap up, and we fill that gap tomorrow into tomorrow's move. Right, so that's the idea of a gap fill, both bullish and bearish. And then we have this based off of if we fill, say, a bullish gap on a miss, an earnings miss, or if we fill a gap down, so meaning price action rallies based off of a beat. So those are the two gap fills. A gap and go is the exact opposite. So that's where, say, price action was here. We open above tomorrow and we continue to go in the bullish direction. Or conversely, we open below and we continue to go in the bearish direction. Now here you'll see there's both a bullish and a bearish gap and go, along with not only the average moves, but also the lowest possible move that you've seen, just in case we had something that's skewing our average so that we get a better representation of what kind of move we can typically expect. So now knowing all of that, let's go through some of these, and I'm going to focus on some of the higher flyer names, but you can repeat this exercise for all of these stocks based off of any criteria that you may be looking at. So let's first start off with something like AYX here. So using AYX, we see expected move greater than expected move 22.2% of the time. Our gap fills here is above 50%, right? We see 5 compared to 2 gap and goes. Now let's take a look at these gap fills. So on the gap fills here, you'll see total gap up fills 2, but 0 times were on misses. However, a gap down, 2 out of 3 times that we had a gap down, that gap was filled, and 2 of those 3 times were on beats. Now if we take a look to see if we have any EPS information plotted here, we don't yet, and this is really what we use to try and determine whether it's a miss or a beat. But I think AYX so far looks to be an interesting candidate in terms of a gap down and a fill on a beat, at least based off of some of the numbers that we've been seeing. So let's go ahead and add that to our list here. So we'll say something like AYX, looking for a gap down and a fill of that gap off of a beat. Right, so I think that would be the first trade that you may potentially have here. I keep going down the line, so we'll, again, focus on anything that has a bullish edge signal. But you'll notice here we have quite a few candidates, right? We have 44 candidates today that meet the list. So now let's take a look at, say, EA. Now on electronic arts here, we'll see we have a greater than expected move 25% of the time. Nothing that really screams out there. 2 gap fills, 2 gap and goes out of 8 total earnings. So that would be one that I think you would just skip and keep looking for better candidates here. Now keep going down. This is one that I think may be interesting. So Marriott, 3 gap fills, 3 gap and goes. So nothing that screams out there. Keep going down. So you have also Monster. Monster's been, I think, ripping up higher. Monster, 2 gap fills, 5 gap and goes. So I think this is something that may call your attention. And then all 5 of those gap and goes were on beats. Right, so I think that's very interesting here. So let's take a look to see, first of all, was this a beat today? We do have the EPS information in Thinkorswim plotting. You'll see it was a 62 cent estimated versus, or 63 technically, compared to what we got, which was 65. So you do have a beat. Now let's take a look to see if we've currently look like we may be gapping up. So the stock price closed at 83.68. We're currently at 82.75, 83.90. So this doesn't necessarily scream out to be a gap and go just yet, but I think that would be fairly interesting if we did have a gap up higher tomorrow. Then Monster would be one that I think you'd be looking at for potential gap and go. So let's go ahead and add that. So we'll say Monster looking for a potential gap and go. Average move, our bullish move is 2.33. Lowest is, if we bring this down just a little bit, you'll see the lowest is 1.21. And I think that would be a potentially interesting trade here. Next up, we have Cloudflare. Cloudflare blew through their earnings, but let's take a look here to see what the results are showing us. So we have 5 total earnings as a result of this 2-year daily chart. Only 1 gap fill, 0 gap and go, so nothing that screams out there. Keep going down the line. NVIDIA here. NVIDIA, 9 total earnings, 1 gap fill, 4 gap and goes. The gap and go may be fairly interesting, but 2 of those gap and goes were on beats. 2 were, or not on beats, 2 were bullish but not on beats. 2 were on bearish with misses. So let's take a look to see if the stock looks to be gapping up for tomorrow. So far, 45.69 compared to 45.86. So nothing that I think here that really is all that interesting so far based off of after hours activity. Planet Fitness, let's see, 5 gap and goes, 2 gap fills. So the gap and goes here look more interesting. So far, the gap and goes, we see we have 3 gap and goes that were bullish, 2 of which were on beats, and then 2 on misses. We don't have the EPS plotting down here just yet. And based off the stock price right now after hours, looks like we're going to be gapping down. So that's where I think I would probably skip Planet Fitness here, considering we have a bullish edge signal that's triggering green, at least as of a few days ago. Peloton, also an interesting one. Peloton chart-wise looks very interesting here, right? Based off of the market pulse, you pulled into the market pulse. Looks like we're going away from the market pulse. You also had a bullish edge signal today. Let's take a look at the actual earnings. So 0 gap fills, only 2 gap and goes here, one of which was a bullish one was a bearish one. If we take a look to see what stock price looks like after hours, 126 as the close compared to 117 as the potential open for tomorrow. So nothing that I think supports this idea of a bullish move so far. In terms of a gap and go, you may be looking at potential gap fill, but we don't really have any statistics here to give us any edge there. Redfin, keep going down, so 9. We have 4 gap fills, 3 gap and goes. Take a look to see what the earnings looks like here. So we were estimating 25 cents rounded up. We actually got 30 cents, and we have a beat here. Let's try and focus to see where we have any edge with beats. Nothing in terms of a gap down on a beat. And then our gap and goes here look fairly interesting, right? So 2 gap and goes, and both of those were off of a beat. So far, looking at the stock price, 47.81. We're at 46 to 47.10. So again, all of these are very much in the iffy boat. So you'll notice how once you go through all of this, you should have a fairly narrow list here. So far, for example, from the candidates we've been taking a look at, we have Alteryx and we have Monster. I'll look at just a few more and then we'll conclude this video. So let's take a look at ROKU, Square, T-Mobile, TTD, maybe even Take-Two. And then we'll skip all of these, maybe take a look at, say, WYNN. So let's go through this a little quicker. So ROKU so far, stock price after hours looks to be up just a tad bit off of our actual earnings activity here. If we hover over, you'll see in the case of ROKU, we were expecting a negative 0.40 cents, got a positive 9 cents, so that's a beat. Let's take a look to see if we have any edge with beats here. So 1 gap down with the potential beat, and then in terms of our bullish gaps, you'll see bullish gap and go. So in both cases here, with a beat, we expect bullish activity to continue tomorrow. Taking a look at the actual charts here, pulled back into the market pulse line, and so far look to be taking away from the market pulse line with the bullish edge signal. After hours activity, 225. You see the stock price is currently up, so far looks like we would be expecting a gap and go on the bullish scenario. So let's go ahead and add that onto our list here. So we'll say ROKU, looking for a bullish move, either gap fill or gap and go. Average bullish gap and go is 9.31. Lowest is 4.75, right? So I think that gives us some sort of an inclination there that we expect to see this bullish continuation move tomorrow. And to give you an idea of what the high currently is, that's 239.14. So far, we're at 229 after hours, which would give us room for, let's just say, $10 if we do continue to make that move. And that fits right into this average move right here, where $9.31 takes you fairly close to the all-time high, and you may see a new all-time high in ROKU tomorrow. Now, keep coming down. We have Square. Square so far with the earnings activity that we have. It was also a beat. Expected a negative earnings, negative 4 cents, got an actual positive 34 cents. So we're going to focus in on the beats here. Gap down doesn't give us any hint here or an edge with beats, but the gap and go here does call out a potential beat if we do see a beat tomorrow in Square. And so far with after hours activity, we were at 179, currently at 182. So I think all signs point to a potential gap and go. So looking for a gap and go. Average move is 5.27. Lowest move is 5.27 since we have only that one data point. Now we keep coming down. We said we take a look at T-Mobile. T-Mobile after hours, if we see the earnings, we expected 50 cents, got a beat of $1. So we know it's a beat here. We can focus in on the beats. Gap down doesn't necessarily give us any hit there. Gap and go there, we have two gap and goes, one of which was on a beat. That could be potentially interesting for those looking for a bullish gap and go here. And the stock price after hours does support that as well. So we'll say T-Mobile gap and go. However, if you take a look here, I think the gap up fills 3 gap ups that were filled, only one of which was on a miss. So actually, I'm going to remove T-Mobile here as a potential gap and go, purely on the basis of we don't have the data here that supports that you wouldn't necessarily see that gap getting filled. We want to try and be as stringent as possible in this criteria. Now, we have the final few. So trade desk here. Trade desk, we'll see after hours. We currently have $1.27 in terms of earnings. In terms of expected, we are expecting 5 cents. So definitely a beat there. Take a look at the stock price, 647.30. So far, we're at 728, so definitely looking at a potential gap up here. And then in terms of a gap up and go, you'll notice one of those was on a beat. The average move here was 25 bucks. So I think TTD would get on that list for a potential gap and go. You also keep in mind here, you do have the gap fill. However, given that we're so far looking like we're going to be gapping up a substantial amount above where price activity closed today, with 728 takes us to even a new all-time high here. That's where I would be very hesitant if this gap does get filled. So we'll say gap up and go, average bullish move, 25.15. And it's going to be the same for the lows as well, considering you only have one data point. Now, let's go take two, and then finally we'll conclude with WYNN. So take two here. Again, we have the data, 86 cents in terms of the actual earnings. We were expecting 96 cents, so this was actually a miss in take two here. Take a look. So now let's focus in on the miss. So gap up, that's filled on a miss. That's one potential one. Also, gap and go, bearish on a miss. Take a look to see what price activity is currently doing. We're currently at 168. Price looks like so far we're going to be gapping up. So it would be this gap up fill that I think would be the likely candidate here in TTWO or TTO, take two. So we'll say gap fill, bearish in take two. And then finally, we said we would conclude with WYNN here. So let's take a look at WYNN. WYNN reported negative actual earnings. It was less, or it was a miss if you take a look at what was estimated versus what we actually got. So let's focus in on the miss here. So gap up fills. We have 1 out of 1 on a miss. And then you come in, take a look to see the gap and goes. 2 out of 2 also on misses. Come in to see what the stock price is looking like. $80 so far. And then after hours looks to be 77.50. So it doesn't look like we're going to be gapping up, but instead looks like we will be gapping down lower. And I would expect that gap to continue. Now keep in mind here, 1 out of the 2 times we did have that gap fill on a bullish scenario when it was not a beat, so that means a miss. And so that's where I think you would want to be a little bit more hesitant here. But we'll go ahead and add this as a gap and go, likely bearish move. Average was, we have 1.73, lowest was $1. And so far, we went through all of those candidates, and we have AYX, Monster, ROKU, Square, Trade Desk, Take Two, and then WYNN, that I think would be some interesting earnings plays for tomorrow for those of you that are looking to trade the actual day of earnings using data, using what has historically happened. All right, so I hope this gives you an idea of how to use the Smarter Earnings tool to try and play earnings for tomorrow. Now, for all of our Volatility Box members, one other thing that I would do to take this one step further is take our entire list that we just created right here. So we had, let's just say, AYX, Monster, ROKU, Square, Trade Desk, Take Two, and WYNN. And now generate the Volatility Box here with a focus on the conservative Volatility Box, and use that to try and play any potential fades in these trades that we have some sort of a reversal that we expected. And then in terms of the gap and goes, that's where I'd be using the aggressive volatility box target line as a potential place to try and take targets. So I would download both the aggressive and the conservative for not only those that we took a look at, but you can also go through any of these other stocks or generate them for all of them and take a look at that to try and essentially be prepared for any stocks in which we have earnings reversal plays. But keep in mind, again, tomorrow's Friday. Fridays typically tend to be a little bit funkier. We also have still the election uncertainty. So I think all of that is going to add to make tomorrow a fairly interesting day. But these stocks in particular, with the data that we have, with the earnings data, the earnings tendencies, I think that gives you a way to try and play some of these moves in a way that's at least a little bit more intelligent. All right, hope this video helps. Take care, everyone. Good luck trading, and we'll see you in the next update.